Hare Krishna, welcome to another video on my channel. Today we are here in Srila Mayapur, the world headquarters of the Hare Krishna movement.
Mayapur Dham Ki
Jai. Sitting on the blue couch here is Pracarananda Prabhu, who is a leading member of the newly formed,
revived
Bhaktivedanta Institute, which is a very important agency of the Hare Krishna movement. Was started by Srila Prabhupada himself because he considered science, not just he wisely considered science a very important tool for spreading Krishna consciousness, and so he founded this institute, which is revived. And Pracarananda Prabhu will tell us about this new situation and its outlook and its mission, and give some insight in this what is not so well known actually, because it was not so active the last years and not so present. So what is the Bhaktivedanta Institute, and how will you make the Hare Krishna movement better?
Thank you. Thank you for those questions. First, I want to apologize to Ananda Krishna Prabhu's normal German-speaking audience that we do this in English, but we felt that there might be some value beyond the Deutschsprachige Welt for this video, so we're going to do it in English. I will try to speak slowly. Srila Prabhupada founded the Bhaktivedanta Institute. The first big event of the Bhaktivedanta Institute was in 1977, shortly before Srila Prabhupada left our material vision. But Prabhupada had a desire throughout his whole life. We can see going back in early Back to Godhead magazines, even going back before the time of Srila Prabhupada, there's a long history of interaction between the Gaudiya Vaishnava community and so-called modern science, going all the way back even to Jiva Goswami, who spoke quite a bit about science, especially as it related to medical science. But Srila Prabhupada was very interested in science. His first real book that he wrote, Easy Journeys to Other Planets, he dedicated to the scientists of the world. And he was predominantly interested in science for two reasons. One was he wanted to try to establish the principles of Krishna consciousness in a scientific fashion. So to communicate the principles of Krishna consciousness in language that scientists could understand and appreciate. And he also wanted to inoculate, he used this word inoculate, it's like geimpft. He wanted to inoculate innocent people in society against atheistic propaganda of modern science. Atheism is not, necessarily a part of science, but we see a trend in modern scientific activities towards atheism. And so Prabhupada objected to that very strongly. And to that end, he founded the Bhaktivedanta Institute. The first big event that the Bhaktivedanta Institute had was the Life Comes from Life conference, which was in Vrindavan, like I said, shortly before Srila Prabhupada left his body, or left our material vision, I should say. And it's very interesting because these devotees, the original members of the Bhaktivedanta Institute, and there were a few of them, the most famous ones, of course, are Bhakti Swarup Damodar Maharaj and Sataputta Prabhu. But there are others, Brahmatirtha Prabhu, Robert Cohen, who's the head of our group of the Bhaktivedanta Institute. There was a devotee named Madhava, who I think has now taken sannyas somewhere in the Gaudiya Mat. I think there was a devotee named Vyanadas, which is an appropriate name for a scientist. And they had this Life Comes from Life conference and in Vrindavan. And after the conferences, after the day's events of the conferences, Prabhupada would call them into the room and ask them, what did the scientists say? And how did you respond? And Prabhupada's body was very ill at the time. He was going through his final disappearance pastimes. And the people who were kind of managing Prabhupada thought that this intense conversation with these scientists, all of the people I just mentioned, Sataputta, Bhakti Swarup Damodar, they all have formal training in the sciences. And that's what Prabhupada wanted in the Bhaktivedanta Institute. And they would try to stop the conversation, the people that were managing Srila Prabhupada at the time. And they'd say, shouldn't we have kirtan now? And Prabhupada said, you do not know what kirtan is. This is kirtan. And there's a verse, I forgot the purport, where Prabhupada says that scientific presentation of Krishna consciousness principles is factually Hari Kata. So Prabhupada was very interested in this. But he didn't leave that many very explicit instructions as to what they should do. We know that there were two main areas that he was interested in. One is this issue of life comes from life, showing that consciousness is not something that arises out of a mature combination of material elements. It's its own thing. And then the other one is cosmology. Prabhupada was very keen. We're here in Mayapur with the Temple of the Vedic Planetarium to show that the descriptions of the universe that are in the Puranic literature are not myths. They are reality. And they can explain, well, he wanted the scientists to be able to explain how the Puranic worldview can explain things like seasons, day and night, eclipses, phases of the moon, things like this. But beyond that, he didn't give too many explicit instructions about it. And subsequent to his departure, things, as they tend to do when a charismatic religious personality goes away, things started to splinter into different groups. There was the Bhakti Swarup Damodar Maharaj camp. There was the Sataputta Prabhu camp. And it's not that they were necessarily, at odds with each other, but they were kind of doing their own thing. Bhakti Swarup Damodar Maharaj was much more networking with the modern scientists, holding conferences. He had a conference where they had a bunch of Nobel laureates. We're back. So there was, and then subsequently also Sataputta Prabhu left his body. He died he had a heart attack while he was swimming in his pool in Alachua, Florida. I was fortunate enough to have some close association with him. I used to eat lunch with him every Wednesday before he left his body. He liked to talk about dinosaurs, things like that. And Bhakti Swarup Damodar Maharaj also left his body. And so things just sort of kind of deteriorated over time, let's say. But one of the original founders of the Bhaktivedanta Institute, or original members of the Bhaktivedanta Institute, Brahmatirtha Prabhu, he's also moving on in years and is considering, what is the legacy he's going to leave behind for Srila Prabhupada. And he's been making an effort over the last years, maybe the last 5 years or so, to really revive the Bhaktivedanta Institute in his hometown of Gainesville, Florida. And so there are many chapters of the Bhaktivedanta Institute around the world. We don't claim to be like the one Bhaktivedanta Institute, but we do have our little branch. Our branch is in the lineage of Sataputta Prabhu. It actually arises out of our management of his library archives. So the Richard Thompson Library Archives I think it's the Richard Thompson Legacy Archives, are housed in Alachua County, Florida. Alachua County is the largest community of Vaishnavas outside of India in the world. And so his archives are there. And our chapter kind of took the maintenance of the archives to another level by reviving this chapter of the Bhaktivedanta Institute. And since then, we've been appointed the official... So there are many branches of the Bhaktivedanta Institute. Our branch has been appointed last year at the GBC meetings as the official scientific advisors to the Temple of the Vedic Planetarium. Mm-hmm. And so that's what brings me to Mayapur now.
So this is one of the major practical works now of the Bhaktivedanta Institute to help present the Vedic universe in this TOVP.
Yeah, to help. We're not taking the lead on it. The temple. So the Temple of the Vedic Planetarium has the main chandelier that hangs from the main central dome, and then in what's called the west wing, the side of the building that's towards the Ganga, not towards Jalangi Dam, there's going to be a science museum, or a natural philosophy museum, really. And there'll be a lot of different exhibits from, basically the exhibits are designed to take the soul from, animal bodies and material existence all the way through the path of evolution into the higher planets and then finally back to Goloka Vrindavan. And so there's a whole narrative through the museum of different exhibits related to evolution and cosmology, and we're consulting, We're letting them know if they're about to do something really stupid, which they haven't yet.
Okay,
yeah,
so you're fine with their work so far?
There is debate, and one of the things that we try to do in our Bhaktivedanta Institute, which is also a staple of regular science, is that there are different opinions about things. There's evidence, but there are different ways to interpret evidence, and part of the scientific method is to discuss these things. And so even within our own group, there is not full agreement on what should be in the dome, what shouldn't be in the dome, what is correct, who had it right. So there's not agreement, but there is dialogue, and there's constructive dialogue, and we see that in all parties, people learn things. So
what is the pre-phase of agreement? So you're working on the agreement to really find the best solution altogether.
Yeah, but I think the presentation that they have now, I mean, I have heard a lot of feedback from it that, what are they doing there? Is this going to be a big embarrassment? I don't think so.
Yeah.
Who is coming to visit Mayapur is one question. Who is the audience for this temple? Is my boss, big scientist, is he going to come to Mayapur and see this temple? I don't know. A lot of people a lot of tourists will come. There are a lot of tourists coming to Mayapur. A lot of local Bengali people will come. A lot of devotees will come. And we just want to create something that'll create some thought, make people think twice about, not necessarily is the modern science wrong and are we right, but is there more? Is there more to the world? Is there more to perceive than what the science tells me? And so I think if that's the goal, I think we're very much on the right track. I think if we're trying to present like the correct version of Puranic cosmology, this is not the right mentality. We know from reading the Bhagavatam that even Lord Brahma does not understand his own universe perfectly. So what are we going to understand perfectly?
You're trying your best.
Yeah, we do our best. In scientific...
It's work in progress also, so you're not stuck. You understand maybe in the future will come new information, a new point of view, which will make it then more according to what it is.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that you raised there, because science is always a work in progress. There's no such thing as conclusive scientific knowledge. It's an iterative process. Scientific knowledge is what scientists call tentative knowledge. We know this, but it's tentative. We know this subject to new evidence coming in. So that's like Veda, right? Knowledge. But we're not Vedaists, we're Vedantists, and Vedanta is the conclusion of knowledge. And so in that regard, will new evidence come in? I don't think so. The Bhagavatam is the Bhagavatam.
No, not new evidence,
but new ways of thinking about it.
Understanding of the evidence, which make it more clear.
Yeah, I think as we as a society grow up, as devotees become more and more pure, and we kind of see that each successive generation of devotees are, bringing the purity up higher and higher. Yeah, there will come people in the future that have a bigger vision than we do right now, as we have a bigger vision now than people may have had 30 or 40 or 50 years ago. So it is an ongoing progress. It is a work in progress. And my understanding is that the way the chandelier is currently formulated is that it can be designed and updated. It's not a fixed thing forever and ever.
Of course. So besides your work for the TOVP, what else is priority of the Bhaktivedanta Institute, and what else will come up and out of your work of the Bhaktivedanta Institute?
Yeah, well, as far as what will come up and out of the work, we are partnered with the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, and Prabhupada even instructed the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust to give us, the Bhaktivedanta Institute, $10,000 a month, he said, in 1977. So we did the math on how much money that is now, and it's a lot.
How much would it be?
It's something like $40,000 a month.
How much are you getting?
Not that much.
But some,
that's okay. We're working towards it.
Whatever DBT can do, it's doing. But some financial support is coming from the BBT side.
Some financial support is definitely coming from the BBT side.
Which is coming now to your agency or your branch of the BI, because your branch is now considered to be the but the authorized one
for consulting with the TOVP.
Okay.
The rest of it is, we submit a proposal to the BBT every year, and they evaluate it. And if they like it, they give us some money. And if they don't, they tell us what they'd like. And what they'd like, we know what they like. They want books.
They want books.
And Prabhupada wanted books.
And Prabhupada wants books.
Yeah, so we want to write books.
Okay.
We have a couple working titles right now. We want to write a book on cosmology. There have been a number of books about cosmology written in the Hare Krishna movement already, actually quite a lot. We want to write a book that kind of takes a historical look back at all of them and kind of synthesize them into one place.
Which are the major works which you are using for this?
There's the work of Dhanagavir Goswami. There's the work of Antardweep Prabhu, who's the main leader of the chandelier model right now. Of course, there's the work of Sataputta Prabhu, Mysteries of the Sacred Universe, which was sort of like the original main publication. He also wrote a book called Vedic Cosmology, which dealt more with the Surya Siddhanta than with Puranic cosmology. And we can talk about what the difference between those two things are if you like. And then there's some lesser works. There's a devotee here in Mayapur named Prem Gauranga who's written a book. There's a devotee in the UK who's synthesized a lot of materials into some very nice presentations that he gives. There's a devotee that we work with in New York, Morley Gopal, who's able to present Sadhuputa's conclusions in a very nice, easy to understand. Sometimes Sadhuputa's stuff was like, whoa, whoa. Morley Gopal is very good at putting this into lay language. He's given a number of seminars. But we want to put this all into one place, see, where is there commonality, where do people disagree. Maybe this is definitely a book for devotees, right? Maybe it's something also that can be used in college classrooms. I remember when I was in college at the Evergreen State College, I took a class on ancient mathematics. And so ancient cosmologies, I'm sure, is also a class where this could be a good textbook. But then we were also thinking maybe making like a big size format book, like the Krsna art book with lots of full color plates and images and modern art. So we'll see what the BBT wants. It's a collaboration.
Okay, besides this cosmology book, we're
writing a book on consciousness. We want to write 2 books on consciousness, actually. One is a real academic book that is meant to address
the hard problem.
Not necessarily the hard problem. It's actually more a mapping project of how various academic disciplines deal with issues that are beyond materialism. And so most academic pursuits are materialistic in philosophy, and I mean that quite literally. The philosophy of materialism, not that they all want money or nice clothes. But what is beyond from a philosophical perspective, beyond materialism, and then how would that affect research, for example, in physics? How would that affect research in chemistry? How would that affect research in social sciences? So that's a very academic project. But we also want to take that same concept and turn that into a bridge book for Sankirtan devotees. And there are several titles for bridge books, or ideas for bridge books for Sankirtan devotees that we have, dealing with consciousness, dealing with the metaphysics of yoga, Mahabhutas, Tanmatras, meditation, stuff like that. And then we also want to do some work with sustainability. And there are 2 more subjects. Sustainability is one, evolution is another. We'll see how that gets to books. So
you're also working on books about evolution and sustainability. There are also books already, working titles.
Not in those 2 fields. Those are not our highest priorities right now, but they are. We'll get there.
Yeah.
We need more people. We need more writers.
Yeah, of course. This is you want to present very high standard books, so it needs a lot of brain to figure that out, and it's good devotees to do that. Yeah,
we have in connection with the Temple of the Vedic Planetarium and the exhibits, we are partnered with a BI-like group in the UK, headed by Kandidi Prabhu, who is the temple president at Bhaktivedanta Manor for a long time, and is now the head of what he calls the Science and Philosophy Initiative. And we've been working with them on this evolution issue quite a lot. Excuse me. There are a number of young devotees in the UK, and by young I mean age-wise young, who are doing PhDs in genetics and microbiology and these types of things. And so we're engaging them in very focused research on issues related to evolution. And what's very interesting in evolution, I mean, I tend to personally, as a geologist, I'm exposed to evolutionary theory and I see how the Earth has evolved. I'm not an expert on how this affects life on Earth, but I tend to buy the scientific narrative, let's say. But what's really interesting in the scientific narrative now is that for a long time in biology, there's been what's called the central dogma of biology, which is that information for the organism is passed from the gene, the DNA, to the broader system of the organism in a one-way street. The DNA is dictating the what's called the phenotypes of the organism. But in modern systems biology, what researchers are seeing, and this is now mainstream accepted science, is that that's not really the case. The DNA acts more as a library, and the individual, the organism itself, the higher order organization of the individual, uses the DNA as a library to pick what strands of genetic code it needs to execute a certain function. And so this is actually now very much more in line with how Prabhupada described evolution, which is not an evolution of physical form. The one thing that Prabhupada repeatedly said about evolution was that there are 8.4 million species and they are always existing. Humans have been always existing, maybe not on this planet. And what is really evolving is the individual's consciousness through these forms. And so you can see the whole consciousness of a planet can elevate from everybody being a trilobite or an amoeba or a foraminifera or a whatever, an ammonite, to larger order reptiles, snakes, dragons, dinosaurs. I don't know if there were dragons. I like to call dinosaurs dragons. Mammals, humans. But Prabhupada is saying that all of these species always exist and the soul is evolving through them. And so sometimes on one planet we may see a trend of evolution, but that's not that the species is evolving. It's that the person is evolving through the species. And modern scientific research is starting to support this. And so it's really interesting. And so we have some young folks doing their PhDs or just finished their PhDs who are doing some really specific research on this topic for the Temple of the Vedic Planetarium.
Mm-hmm. So are you going also into the topic life comes from life and showing how, let's say like this, or challenging the assumption that out of pure matter life gets created, because this anyway is really hard to explain by scientists also, how actually DNA, if DNA is like the how to say, the
building blocks or the code.
Code, how does DNA come together by accident, which is necessary to build a body? So
yeah, we have to be careful about using words like accident and chance in a scientific sense. Often these words don't mean what people think they mean, and I'm not going to get into a great detail about that because I'm also not a philosopher of science. There's the famous Stanley Miller experiment from I don't know how many years ago, where this guy Stanley Miller, and he did this together with some other scientists. He basically filled
Urey.
Yeah, thank you. The Urey Miller experiment, where they filled a flask up with what they believed to be a prototypical atmosphere of the Earth. And they can make some reasonable educated guesses as to what the original atmosphere of the Earth was based on rocks, meteorites, etc. And so they filled a flask up with this stuff and they started zapping it with static electricity. And after a while, this black film formed around the outside of it. And then they analyzed what was in the black film and they saw that there were some amino acids in there. And so they think, we discovered how life might form. But this has been widely debunked. I mean, most scientists don't even buy into this.
Okay, one is, of course, that amino acids are far away from life, because amino acids are the building blocks of proteins, which are necessary for life itself. Yeah. So this is the first thing, that they were not creating life, they were just amino acids.
Correct.
And but what you mean they're debunked that the experiment itself was flawed?
No,
or
the experiment...
assumption that they created life?
Yeah, neither. They didn't make the assumption that they created life. They showed that we can create amino acids. But when I say it's been debunked, I mean it's been sort of relegated to a historical footnote. Because the problem, these amino acids, in organic chemistry, there's something called chirality, which is the way the molecules in an organic, the way the individual constituents of an organic molecule are arranged. And so you can have something that resembles an amino acid, but if the molecules aren't in the right place in the chain, they won't form together to form proteins. And so the chirality of, the amino acids that were formed in the Miller experiment were way off. I mean, these things would never, ever form together to form proteins.
Yes.
Now, there's another argument here, which is what if they did have the proper chirality? What is the likelihood that they would then form proteins and then form self-replicating life? And there's often a statistical argument that's made. And devotees like to make this statistical argument, and Sariputta has done this, where they just combine a whole bunch of statistics together, and they get this ridiculous number.
Okay.
Yeah, that would show that if you use that type of argument, this is statistically impossible that this would ever happen. Yeah. But that's not exactly how statistics work. Yeah.
Because even if there's this chirality, which means like that it's like a puzzle, which means they would fit together. But now my question is anyway, if there is chirality, but what brings them together and in such a way that a protein and then DNA could form, what is the force?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So I can tell, and I'm not saying I agree with this, but I can tell you what some of the most recent scientific research says about this, because this actually intersects my own field of research, geothermal energy. At the bottom of the ocean, in the middle of the ocean, where oceanic plates come together, there are volcanoes called black smokers. And these black smokers are teeming with life. there's life all around them, because at the bottom of the ocean, like, it's 4 degrees, but right around the volcano, it's a couple hundred degrees or more, even 1,000 degrees Celsius. But if you move away from where the volcano is on the oceanic plate at the bottom of the ocean, you have colder types of volcanism, lower temperature volcanism. And this alters the rock. And so you have basalt. This is what ocean crust is made out of. Basalt is a type of rock. It's a silicate rock, but it's very high in iron and magnesium. And when basalt undergoes hydrothermal alteration, it forms a mineral called serpentinite. And you get a rock called a serpentinite. And it's been shown by scientists that if you take the results of something similar to the Miller experiment and you run it through this serpentine, this mineral serpentine, or these clays that form as hydrothermal alteration products in these off-ridge volcanoes, it actually filters out the molecules that have the wrong chirality. And so it concentrates the proto-amino acids that have the correct chirality. So already you've changed the statistical likelihood of these things forming. Then you can also make a statistical argument that the statistical likelihood of these things forming into a larger protein is not the likelihood of each individual reaction. It's 50-50. It either will or it won't. And so that's the problem with statistics, is that you can set up a statistical argument to prove any point that you want.
But the filter is one thing, but the formation is another thing. It's just a filter, but it doesn't mean that that the same mechanism will combine all this now.
It doesn't mean that it will.
Amino acids which they could form together.
It doesn't mean that it will. It means that the likelihood of it happening is higher, because there are less. More because there are less wrong
but
pieces.
But still far away. So they just research in this direction mean this could.
No, it's 50-50. You have two particles. They come together. Either they will combine or they won't.
Yeah.
But I'm not agreeing with that argument either. I'm saying that
there's research in this direction and some progress they mean in this direction.
Yeah, this
confirm
is
that theory.
Yeah, this field of research is called abiogenesis.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Abiogenesis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's all cutting edge kind of stuff.
Yeah. But still far away from proving that life originated from matter.
It's far away from proving that life originated from matter. It's also important to remember that from a scientific perspective, it's impossible to prove anything.
Okay.
You can only disprove things using the scientific method.
Okay.
Yeah. So if somebody tells you they have scientific proof of something, don't believe them.
Yeah. No, yeah. We have to be highly skeptical.
And I'm saying this as a professional scientist.
Yeah, even better that you confirmed that. Yeah, sure. Now we went
I went very deep into hydrothermal alteration and serpentinites.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, let's go back. So what will be the work of the BI concerning life comes from life? Because that's what we talked now. Yeah.
Abiogenesis.
Abiogenesis is like the enemy in one sense, or it's like the opposition, and we have to prove life comes from life. We have to prove a biogenesis. So what is your cutting edge?
Yeah, first of all, for the purposes of engaging with scientists and networking and creating a constructive atmosphere for learning, we try not to be oppositional. We're moving away from this as seeing them as the enemy or the opponent or something that we're fighting against. We're trying to take a more Brahminical rather than Kshatriya-like approach, in which is that we're cultivating knowledge. And we feel that our Bhagavatam, the metaphysics of the Bhagavatam, for example, the teachings of Kapila Dev, actually have a lot to offer to this conversation about how, the Bhagavatam explains in great detail how all of this happens. You know, how things come from the Mahatattva, there's the Pradhana, and there's the Mahatattva, and then things manifest from subtle to gross, and then there's agencies behind this. There's the Tanmatras.
Okay. Yeah. This is all our
Vaishnava metaphysics.
Mythological metaphysics.
It's not mythology, it's metaphysics. It's mythology that Kapila Dev spoke this to Devahuti.
Yes, but also if you bring in Prajapatis, then it goes into this. Anyway, this could be seen like, so I wonder what is, because you said, you give example of they have a real situation which shows their might prove their assumptions right of this serpentine stuff. So how do you prove now in experiment our metaphysics of Kapila Dev?
That is the great question, and I think that is the main work of the Bhaktivedanta Institute, and I think that's what Prabhupada was really getting at when he said he wanted to establish the principles of Krishna consciousness on a scientific basis. We need to find a way to take these metaphysical principles, which are very clearly laid out, and which I think a lot of devotees understand better than I do, and turn them into real experiments. And we've seen something like this going on. There's a devotee in Alachua, Florida, Dear Govinda, Dr. David Wolf, who's done some experiments with the effects of chanting Hare Krishna on mental health and stuff like that. But Akandadi Prabhu has his whole Atma paradigm. And we're working on ways of understanding how we can bring this from a metaphysical place into a more scientific place, because scientists don't really accept metaphysics. Metaphysics is a branch of philosophy.
So this would be a revolution if we would have like a university or a research lab where we really prove the Bhagavatam right in hard facts.
Yeah.
That would be...
Well, I mean,
it's like a vision.
It's a fact by observation that, consciousness is independent from matter. For example, take vision. This was the example that Akandadi Prabhu was giving in our seminar the last week. We see something. What we are seeing really is just an electromagnetic vibration. Visible light, infrared light, gamma ray light, and this enters our eyes, and this hits rods and cones in the back of our eyes, and depending on the pattern in which certain electromagnetic vibrations of life hit our rods and cones, the rods and cones send our brain neurological signals, electrical impulses to the brain, and the brain somehow takes these neurological impulses and turns them into a picture. But there's no place in the brain where there's a picture, and nobody knows where in the brain the electrical impulse becomes a picture. But we're seeing something that moves, it has colors, it invokes emotions in us. We see a beautiful sunset, we're like, oh, it's a beautiful sunset. We see someone mistreating a cow, and we're like, oh, you're mistreating a cow. And we don't know. So that's gross physical seeing. But we also know that we can see things with our mind's eye, that I don't require my eyes to see anything. I can see just with my mind. And so how does that work? And it's not only seeing, that's an easy one. I mean, we see in our dreams. I close my eyes, I can picture my mom, I can see Lord Gauranga on the altar just in my mind's eye. But this is actually true for all the senses. And it's actually the practice of pratyahara, of the Ashtanga yoga system. We hear about pratyahara, withdrawing their senses from their objects. We don't often teach about what that really means from a yoga perspective. And what that means is, I'm withdrawing my sense of vision from the object of the vision, which is my eye. I can do the same thing with sound. I can withdraw the function of hearing away from the sense object of my ear, and I can just hear things in my mind. I can taste things in my mind. I can smell things in my mind. And that's what the yogis mean by pratyahara, by withdrawing the senses from their object of the senses. And that, again, and everybody can do this. Everybody can try this at home. There's a very famous practice of meditation called neti neti. I used to do this before I became a devotee. We'd sit, everybody sits in a chair, says Om a few times, and say, I'm not my foot, I'm not my foot, I'm not my leg, I'm not my arm, I'm not my body, I'm not my mind. What am I? So everybody can see this. This is not advanced science. We are so bewildered by material life that we forget to notice this. Mm-hmm. And Prabhupada writes, everybody can understand I exist. But what is the I that is existing? You cannot trace this back to a material function. You can't do it. Nobody can. And that's why it's the hard problem. So scientists know this, but they keep looking on this using materialistic philosophy and materialistic means. And so our challenge for the Bhaktivedanta Institute is to take a non-material principle and bring it into the scientific realm. That is what will convince the scientists. And I see this as decades worth of work. This is not something that...
All that what you described now, these are not even the blueprint. It's just like not a vision, which you have to bring into a blueprint, into a real plan, and then start. Yeah.
So there are people out there who can explain this in much greater detail than I can. Akandadi Prabhu.
But in general, you're starting the work now, and as you said, you lay the stepping stones for the next generations of ISKCON scientists.
Yes, exactly. And that's how I see my own personal role in the Bhaktivedanta Institute. As a geologist, Brahmatirtha Prabhu, who revived our little chapter, was, you got to get involved, we need scientists. And I'm just like, man, you want to know something about rocks, you want to know something about water chemistry, I'm your guy. But these things are I'm interested in Vaishnava metaphysics as a devotee. I've not studied it carefully enough to make a scientific treatise about it. And you don't need a PhD in anything to make a scientific treatise out of this stuff. Anybody who's interested in these things can participate, and we welcome the participation of everybody. My skill in this regard is as a manager of scientists,
okay.
And that's what my job is. So that's why I'm in a managerial role.
Okay, you're a manager, so not necessarily the one who produces the information.
Not in relation to consciousness.
Not in relation to consciousness, but
cosmology I know a bit more about.
Cosmology, or even use your geological background to prove some teleological arguments, to see the design in the structure of minerals, of rocks, and to prove or show how could this come about by accident, however one interpret it now, that there must be some guiding principle behind it, or might not be this also an approach towards it?
Yeah, well, the Earth is part of the universe, and so if we look at the evolution of the Earth, and the evolution of the Earth is something that I have studied quite a bit, in chemical evolution of the Earth specifically, how the Earth formed, and how the Earth evolved after its form. So we have continents and oceans and rivers and mountains and stuff. This is something I, can speak for hours about. But in order to understand that, we need to get out of, the solar system, and we need to understand where stars came from. And to understand where stars came from, we need to go all the way back to the very beginning, which was what we call the Big Bang, or the singularity. And so geology then becomes entwined with cosmology. And there's a lot of work to be done in this regard. In modern cosmology, the standard model of modern cosmology, which is sort of the official name of the Big Bang, the so-called Big Bang theory, the inflationary model of the universe. In order for this model to work, scientists acknowledge that a huge percentage of the mass in the universe can't be seen.
Yeah.
Like, we see things and we've created this model, and there's good evidence out there that the universe is expanding. There's the cosmic background radiation. So it's not that the Big Bang is just some fantasy of Edwin Hubble.
It fits also with our
observations,
creation story.
But in order for
we understand from Mahavishnu the universe expands.
Yeah, also.
But just if it still expands, I don't read it out of the Puranas so far. It's more like it's expanded, is in a state of, is in one state of existence, and then it collapses again. So I can't read out there's one mentioning where Prabhupada said, it still expands in one discussion. I read it once in one morning walk. Prabhupada mentions that it's still expanding, but this one rare stance in general, it seems to me, expansion, state of being, and it collapses.
Well, there's a lot of contradictions now. The universe as described in the Srimad Bhagavatam is a lot smaller than what we think we can observe. So
in the Bhagavatam is only, what is it?
4 billion miles across, which is about the orbit of Saturn.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this is the Brahmanda, how big it is. Yeah, it's stated all over the Puranas.
But we can see things out there using, not using advanced telescopes or highly speculative methods like standard candles or anything like that. And we can talk about that if you want. Using a principle called parallax. Which is just geometry, very simple geometry and trigonometry.
Meaning to see further than this 4 billion miles.
Much further, yeah.
I have one, maybe we shouldn't go too far. I don't know what the time says, because,
Oh, we're doing well.
We're doing well.
We're not doing that well, but
we don't not that well, but maybe I say one thing, you can comment on that, and then you can maybe wrap it up.
Okay. Fair enough.
There is in the Bhagavatam, in the 5th canto, a description of a mirror-like realm beyond the Loka mountain, quite the edge of the universe, of the Vedic universe, which is mirror-like. It said something what is like the golden land or something. Said like this. When something falls on that, you cannot see it anymore because somehow it disappears. But still, it's like a mirror. Maybe the universe is not that big as we perceive it, but maybe this substance, like a mirror, makes everything bigger, right? If you have a mirror in some place, I think you have more space.
Well, that's a speculation, which we could entertain.
But maybe it's all a reflection.
Maybe it's all a reflection. The Voyager probe, which NASA launched sometime in the 70s, recently left, and it's still in communication with Earth. If we just take what they say at face value, I'm not going to get into any conspiracy theories
another big thing.
Yeah, we're not talking about conspiracy theories. It's still in communication with Earth, and it just left the gravitational pull of the sun. And so that's much, much far beyond the orbit of Saturn. This thing took very high-resolution pictures, high resolution for the 70s, pictures of Uranus and Neptune, which are well beyond the orbit of Saturn. But I will, to your point, I will say this, and this is probably a good place to conclude, that When people approach Prabhupada with doubts about the fifth canto and how this doesn't exactly line up with what we see in the heavens, Prabhupada gave two examples. He said, one, we're like an ox tied to a stake, just walking around in a circle, and all we'll see is just what's right in front of us as we walk around in this circle. The other example he gave is like we're like a pig roasting on a spit, so turning around, we're just turning around. So what can a pig know about, so we don't know anything. And modern scientists, and I say this again as a scientist, they don't know anything either. 97% of the mass in their lambda CMD model is missing. Right. In order for their model to work about how gravitational waves form all this stuff and everything holds together and it's expanding here and redshift, they are missing all of this mass, dark energy, dark matter. And so they predict this. They predict that this must be out there. And that's part of science too. Science must be predictive. And so that's fair enough. We are discovering things now that Einstein predicted regarding gravitational waves. There's a devotee in Caltech, for example, who studies gravitational waves. And so we're discovering things now that Einstein predicted that could not have been discovered then because they didn't have the technology for it. But until now, all of this dark matter and dark energy that's predicted by the lambda CMD model, the standard model, nothing. And they spend billions and billions of dollars on their particle accelerators and these mine shafts looking for neutrinos. Nothing. So we'll see, we'll see.
You are, as in the Bhaktivedanta Institute, to give it a final point, you also predict many things according to the Bhagavatam, and now has to come this research to confirm that, and it will be confirmed in future.
That's exactly right. There are many things. The Bhagavatam does have a lot of real science in it. It does make predictive claims about consciousness. Our challenge, like these guys looking for dark matter, dark energy, our challenge in the Bhaktivedanta Institute is to take those predictive scientific claims that are in the Bhagavatam and discover the technology by which they can be demonstrated in the real world. And for me, and I'll make this one point, the last point, because I know we were talking about this before, the real science in the Bhagavatam is not about cosmology or evolution or any of this stuff. It's about the practice of Bhakti Yoga. Yeah. The practice of Bhakti Yoga in and of itself is a predictive science. Exactly. Yeah, we predict that if you have a little bit of faith in Krishna consciousness, you will want to associate with devotees. And we see this happening all the time.
And want to eat a lot of prasadam.
And
that's satisfied with prasadam.
Yeah, and that's called bhajana and kriya. That's the kriya part, or is that the bhajan part? I don't know. But in the association of devotees, we predict that you will learn how to worship Krishna and you will learn how to work for Krishna. And we predict that if you do this, bhajana and kriya, work and worship Krishna, the unwanted things in your heart will disappear. Lust, greed, anger, envy, all of these things. And we predict that if all of the unwanted things in your heart disappear, you will have fixed, firm faith in Krishna. You will not be on the mental platform. And then on into the different rasas and bhavas and premas and whatnot. So this is actually a predictive science that has been confirmed by many great spiritual scientists throughout the ages. In the modern times, Prabhupada cites Madhvacharya, Ramanujacharya, Nimbarka Swami, Vishnu Swami, but he also cites the ancient sages of India, Asita, Devala, Narada, Gautama. So that's really the science that we're after. I think all of this other stuff is like pushing aside the curtains to get to the real heart of the matter.
Yeah, wonderful. That's a very nice outlook, very spiritual outlook also.
Jai.
Thank you so much for your work.
Thank you.
And your time to present this to us. And
I hope you liked it.
I cannot doubt that you didn't like it. I bet they did. And yeah, thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions, you can comment in the comment box below or get in contact directly. If you're a scientist or very much involved in science, can get in contact with Pracarananda Prabhu. You can be of some help. You never know. And give Ananda a donation. He needs it. If you like to support my channel, you can do it with a donation. Spendenkonto. And you can like the video and subscribe. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you also. And Jai. Hare Krishna. That's it. 1 second to spare. Oh, we're perfect.